Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined on Blogging Heads TV. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Karl Smith. Karl, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Karl Smith. I'm Vice President for Federal and Economic Policy at the Tax Foundation and blogger at Bloomberg Opinion, or columnist, I guess, at Bloomberg Opinion.
Yeah, are there even bloggers anymore? No one.
Not really. I mean, I was a blogger back in the day, but they've converted us all.
Yeah, not too many people still calling themselves bloggers, except for maybe Blogging Heads we're the last holdout. And so thanks for coming back on. You were on, longtime viewers may remember you coming on probably around 2010 or so, and talking about economics back then. And I guess around that time was probably we're starting to crawl out of the Great Recession, and now we have this new craziness that's happening, and obviously everyone knows about. So I asked you on because I have questions about how the coronavirus pandemic is affecting the economy and the things the administration is doing and what we might expect going forward. And I've seen people, especially on Twitter, kind of with saying things that seem to me wrong, but maybe I'm wrong because I don't know anything to begin with. So I guess the first thing I'll ask is how would you grade like the administration's response so far? We're taping this on Wednesday, April 1st. Things are moving fast, but is this a good first step? Is this all they need to do, or not enough by far? What would you say?
I mean, it's a hard question to ask, so I'll answer in a couple different ways. So relative to what happened in 2008, I can say that this is definitely a vastly improved response on every level. So both what the federal government itself is doing, what the Federal Reserve is doing, the speed at which they're doing it, and the lack, I guess, of pushback that they're getting from politicians for doing it. The scale of the crisis is difficult to determine, and it looks more and more massive every day. I mean, I think early on, there were some people, myself included, who said I think this is going to be potentially really massive. I think 2 weeks ago, maybe Goldman Sachs was saying that we may only get like a 5% drop in GDP. They moved to a 30% drop, and so that's more consistent with what I thought might happen. They're still on the side that, well, maybe everything will recover and rebound right after we defeat the pandemic. I'm less confident about that. And so I think more will have to be done. I think that it may wind up being like an enormous economic challenge on the scale of, in many ways greater than the Great Recession, but in terms of like having to ramp up our policy response, on the scale of the Great Recession. And it remains to be seen whether or not we'll do that. But the first signs are encouraging. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think probably if things go my way, much more will need to be done. But I'm pleasantly surprised as much was done so far as has been.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so one of the things, and you please correct me if I get any of these facts wrong. One of the things that the Federal Reserve did was it injected like 1.5 trillion in liquidity, money, something into the banking system. And I saw people online saying things like, wait, they say we can't have Medicare for all, but the banks can get 1.5 trillion. Right. And so that's not right. Is that correct? Like, it's not real. It's not like they gave them a bunch of dollar bills or something.
No. So all the things that the Federal Reserve does are loans. So they can't give. This is a big distinction, really important that, we even get kind of technical about. The Federal Reserve can only loan people money. It can't give people money. They always have to give it back. And in fact, the Federal Reserve can't even loan people money that it's 99% sure will pay it back unless the Treasury gives it permission. So the Treasury has to give it what's called loss provisions. The Treasury has to authorize them to lose a certain amount of money or risk losing a certain amount of money. And so with the banks, when they did the 1.5 trillion, that was a loan that we call a repurchase agreement. The simple way to put it is that it's a loan for 3 days. And it's a loan for 3 days that you have to put up collateral for. And usually the collateral then was a Treasury bond. So if I give you, $1 million in treasury bonds, then the Federal Reserve will give me $1 million in cash for 3 days, and then we change back. And they give me back my bonds, and I give them back their cash. So it amounts to a 3-day loan, fully collateralized. So there's essentially no risk at all that the Federal Reserve is undertaking. And so that's what you have. So that's what makes it much, much different than paying for something where you would expend that money and never get it back.
Okay. So is that like kind of like is this like an accounting gimmick? Or is this just a way to kind of say like everything's gonna be fine, but really not that much change? It's just like the Federal Reserve is like instilling fortitude in the banks, or is that not the case?
So I think it's a little bit more than that. I mean, so it's hard to imagine, but like the payment system in America like swaps, hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars a day, right? And so some of the way I've explained it is, all right, when you go and buy something at the store, what you're really doing, almost everybody uses a card. What you're really doing is giving your bank, an order to pay money to another bank. And say you're Bank of America and your merchant is JP Morgan, you're saying Bank of America pay JP Morgan $50 for what I just bought, right? That happens all across the country every day. And then at the end of the day, they cash out, right? So they say all Bank of America customers put this many orders into JP Morgan put this many orders into Bank of America. And when we net it out, JP Morgan, you owe Bank of America $200 billion. Can you please give us $200 billion in cash? And they do that every day across so for consumer banks, for business banks, for the banks that are lending on Wall Street, they're all doing that, cashing out at the end of the day. And so they can end up short on cash, and you have to settle at the end of every day in cash.
So what is that? Does cash mean there's Scrooge McDuck, like gold coins or dollar bills or something, or is it all just exists electronically, even though it is like real money?
It all exists electronically, but inside the banking system, there is called reserve accounts. And so a reserve account is like tracked by the Federal Reserve. Like the Federal Reserve knows exactly how much there is in total reserve accounts. And that's what banks use to swap between them is in the reserve account. And the reserve account represents like a dollar bill. It's just an electric version of a dollar bill. Like if you get the dollar bill, it says Federal Reserve note $1. And so then you just have like a digital version of Federal Reserve $10, but it has to be like authorized by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve tracks where all reserves go. And so, that's basically like digital cash. It's like digital cash. Yeah. Go ahead.
So the answer is that it's not like, people saying, why can't we do Green New Deal if the Federal Reserve is giving all this money to the rich people at the banks? That's not accurate. It's a loan, and it's a very short. If a 3-day loan is as short term as you can get, more or less. So part of the bill that was passed is like a stimulus check. It's only one for this one. There were some that it would be a couple, but it's only one. It's like $1,200. I guess everyone who filed a tax return a year ago or 2 years ago is going to conceivably get one of these checks. So that made some people start thinking about, Andrew Yang's UBI proposal of $1,000 every month. And, there's no way to know right now how long this crisis is going to last. And if they give us one of these checks every 2 months or so, it starts to kind of seem like a UBI thing. And then it can be hard to, once you start giving people stuff from the government, it can be hard to take it away from them if they get used to it. So this is all a way to ask, what do you think of this, of just cutting checks in this crisis? And then, going forward, why not just keep on cutting checks to make people, make people's lives better anyway?
So I think cutting checks in the crisis is probably good. I mean, there are a number of different ways that we could deal with it. I mean, so we already talk about this, but our biggest concern is that a lot of economic activity is forcibly shut down. So easily people who work at bars, restaurants, places like that, they can't go to work at all. In most places, there's some level of stay-at-home order, which means that unless you can remote work, you can't come into work. Maybe unless you're an essential worker in certain sectors, you can't come into work. Some employers are keeping you on payroll. Some people work by the hour, and so they're not going to get any money. And so all across the economy, we're afraid that people might be short on cash. But they have like bills to pay. And so there wanted to be some effort to give out cash indiscriminately because there was no way to really track in real time like who's affected. And it was hard because like it's not that much for most people. I mean, I think we did some calculations, and so for people near the poverty line, I mean, if you're a single mother with 2 children, you get $1,200 plus you get $500 for each kid, so that's $2,200. And for 1 month, for people near the poverty line, that actually turns out to make a big difference. And so for people who are really scraping by, it could make a big difference. For most people, it'll be a bump, but it's not going to, you know, I mean, like in the cities, it's not even going to pay your mortgage. But like, but for a lot of people who are poor, it will. And it's impossible to know exactly which one of those people are affected in exactly which way. So this was the idea behind the blanket check. And it was a way to like give us at least a month or so some cash out there for everyone so that we could then figure out what to do next. The big hope of what's going to be next or whatever is these small business administration loans, which are essentially going to give businesses enough money to keep their payroll for 4 months, even if they don't have any business coming in the door. Mm-hmm. But in order to do that, they have to have I think it's at this point 75%. At one point, it was 90% of their payroll that they had at the beginning of March. They have to keep that all the way through the 4 months. So if they can keep 90% of the people on, then they get this loan that will pay for the payroll the entire time. And the idea there is that even businesses that don't have any revenue coming in because they have no customers, they'll be able to keep people working, and that will give people money to pay their bills. Mm-hmm. And then there's a third part, which is the unemployment insurance boost, which is added on to whatever regular unemployment insurance is an extra $600 a week, which is calculated to be 40 hours a week at $15 an hour. And so anybody who goes on unemployment gets their regular unemployment insurance plus for another 4 months, an extra $600 a week. And so those 3 measures together were what's going to be hopefully to take us at least through this month and maybe a couple of more months. So you have people who lose their jobs outright. They're getting some amount of cash that like will keep them out of poverty. Businesses hopefully will not lay as many people off because they're getting these loans, and everybody just gets a smattering in case we miss someone. It's kind of the idea, you know? So I don't know. So are you discouraged by this? Do you think it's
I mean,
bad?
that seems decent. I mean, part of the, okay, so I guess, you know, the unemployment is based on your salary, so that can be different based on where you live. So, you know, one thing I've seen is people saying, especially if you live in New York City, rent is very expensive, and you could be, you know, a bartender and still be like renting a studio for $1,500 a month or something. Right. If your income is suddenly reduced to zero, $1,200 is not. I saw a tweet from someone saying I might as well just hand this check to my landlord, and that actually goes to like another area I want to ask about, which is paying rent, paying mortgages, and this idea of a rent strike that people are talking about, at least online. And I feel like, you know, so it's obvious that like if you have no money coming in, you can't pay your rent, and if you just have a little bit of money coming in, you're going to pay for food, not your rent, like that, you know, food comes first. And then maybe there's people who could pay some part of their rent, but not the entire thing. You know, if I was thinking about it, and it seems like if there is some sort of massive coordinated or not rent strike, it could kind of lead to the same thing that happened in 2008, like eventually like banks start going under because, you know, there's a lot of people online who don't like landlords, but the landlord probably is paying a mortgage, right? Not just like sitting on a bunch of cash and like driving a Cadillac. And so if the landlord can't get the rent, then eventually they can't pay their mortgage. They can't pay the mortgage. The banks are not getting money, and some, you know, these mortgages are sometimes sliced and diced and split up into securities in various ways. And we saw what happened with that in 2008. But eventually, like the banks are relying on the mortgage checks coming in, and if those stop coming, then you have like a banking crisis. And as we saw in 2008, the government is probably going to step in and save the banks if the big banks are threatening to go under. And then, does that chain of logic make sense?
It does make sense. And I mean, I think that the potential for that crisis is there, and there's some action that's being taken with it. So I don't actually know how far they got on this, but I think they did. The FHA suspended sort of foreclosure. So if you have a loan through certain, government agencies, then you're not going to get a foreclosure for 2 months, and they're able to do that. So the FHA is like wholly owned by the government. The Federal Reserve is sort of like working with banks to encourage them to give people forbearance. I mean, the way the system works, I mean, we can't like force them to do it, but they have additional sort of lending programs that go like this, the Federal Reserve will loan, say, again, Bank of America or Wells Fargo, money at 0% interest if what it will do is take forbearance on mortgages and other types of loans through this crisis. And I think I can't remember what the take-up rate is. Actually, I think Bank of America, ironically, was one of the few banks who didn't immediately sign on to that. But a lot of banks did. And so I don't think it's automatic. I think you have to ask for it. You have to ask for it, and like usually these things you have to write a letter like saying what your problem is, and theoretically they could check, but like there's hundreds of thousands of letters.
A mortgage holder.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a landlord. I bought, a small, fourplex or something, and I'm renting it out. I write a letter to Wells Fargo that says, my tenants have been laid off because of the crisis. We won't have any rent for, coming in for this month, for next month. Can you forbear my mortgage? So it just means that we don't do payments for these couple months. We still tack those payments on the end, so you're not getting out of them, but we'll just wait a couple of months. And many banks have agreed basically en masse to do that, right? I mean, so there are standards, and I said, in theory, they can check to make sure, but usually in these types of mass things, there's just no logistical way they can check up on everybody. They don't even have time to give everybody a phone call. So usually, at least at first, everybody who asks gets it. And it's not hard. I mean, the truth is in foreclosures, the standard practice is to give you like a month or two if you ask for it anyway, just because once you enter a foreclosure process, it's extremely difficult, for the bank, and they go to court and all this kind of stuff. So if there's any chance that you might be able to catch up, they'd much rather you do that than go through all the legal hassle of it. And this sort of just formalizes that and gives them cash to sort of hold them over. So I think right now they're operating on a 60-day sort of thing, and there's comfort that, we'll find a way through this. The interest rates are really low, so the baseline interest rate in the economy, we call the Fed funds rate, is 0% interest. So every interest rate on top of that is stacked according to risk and duration and all that kinds of stuff. But the total risk-free rate, or the bottom risk-free rate of interest for a very short amount of time, it actually ends up being just 1 day, is 0%. And so that means that every other interest rate is pretty low too. The banks, that's effectively what they pay if they need money, is 0% right now. A little bit more than that, transactions costs and stuff. And so they can handle this time, without necessarily going under. So that's the hope. That's the hope among all this, that it won't cause a crisis. Because even if there's not a strike, an outright strike, there's just concern that there are potentially millions of people who won't have the money to pay. And, what are you going to do about that? So you have to somehow, I think the term that we use at the beginning is freeze financial time. So that's really difficult. The financial system depends on regularity and things happening when they're scheduled to happen. But as much as possible, the Federal Reserve was trying to freeze financial time for as long as it could. It's going to try to do it right now for 60 days and see what happens. And then maybe by the end of the 60 days, we'll have better ideas than we have now. It's generally how that works. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And so there's also the human suffering aspect of this angle, which is that so if people can't pay their rent, And if that goes on for a couple months, usually the landlord evicts them.
Uh-huh.
But if there's no way they can work at all, then that that's a shitty thing to do to someone. And
Right.
also, you might get, especially in this age when anything can go viral. Landlords who are evicting people willy nilly will probably get really bad press, and also filling the apartments again with other people. See, since the whole system is kind of locked up right now, that seems unlikely. So hopefully, landlords will have just kind of a system worked out individually with their tenants, where be like, okay, this is a century defining emergency right now. Like
Right.
you could skip 3 months and we'll figure it out later, or something like that. So
Well, I'll just say one thing to that, just because you brought it up. So, like, in the bucket of random people we might have missed. So this is a common thing here in D.C. Not common, but it's a thing that can happen. So we have a lot of townhouses that have a basement apartment and then a larger sort of house on top in the basement apartment. And so say that you're a little old lady who had this townhouse, and then what you did is you moved into the basement and rented on top. And then you use the rent as just like your money, right? And now your tenant can't pay because, they lost their job or whatever. Because you weren't employed to begin with, you're not getting unemployment. There's no business to send you payroll. And so you wouldn't be included in any of those other programs, but you still get a $1,200 check. So maybe it'll help you out. I mean, that's kind of like some of the random holes that it's hoping to fill in the economy. If there's like a landlord who's depending on rent to eat, to feed themselves. But go ahead. I think you're going somewhere else with this.
Well, I was just thinking, something that we heard about starting with the 2008 crisis after stimulus was passed was these fears of inflation. And
Right.
so, this new stimulus is like 2.5 times as big as the previous one. The Fed is dropping to zero, so seemingly banks can borrow money at no risk whatsoever. And there were people, especially on the right, who were saying inflation is coming. We're going to become Zimbabwe. Printing dollar bills and you'll be having like wheelbarrows in the street in order to buy something. So this was a lot of scaremongering, and then basically inflation has stayed low this entire time.
Right.
Is it now that real economy is ground to a halt, but they're giving everyone money? Could inflation actually come now, or are we still it's still basically like we kind of figured out how to prevent that?
So inflation in the way that economists mean is probably not going to come. So like a general increase in overall prices over like a sustained period of time. That's probably not going to happen just because people are collapsing their spending. What you see is that this is the problem that banks had when a crisis like this happens. People try to hold more cash. Everybody wants to have more cash on hand. And so that is essentially where the money goes, right, rather than spending. And so we're seeing spending overall in the economy collapse. And unless spending overall is rising, it's hard for prices to rise overall. Now, what I am more concerned about is that in particular areas that you could see price spikes, and we haven't exactly figured out what we're going to do about that. So, for example, you have an enormous drop in spending in anything related to entertainment, eating out, and stuff like that. But then you have an enormous increase in spending on groceries, right? And so that's putting an enormous strain on the grocers to fulfill all these orders, to hire more workers. Now they have their workers potentially going on strike, and in some cases asking for double wages. And so if that goes through, there will be price spikes in groceries, I would think. So, and the only reason I say that is because I think that there's some recognition that this might be a problem, at least for certain consumers who, the groceries are a big portion of their budget. There's fear, quite honestly, that it'll be an optics problem. If certain things start spiking in price, it'll make people think that we could have this big, surge of inflation that's going to come. And so there's thought about how to deal with this or what might be our way through this, whether there's going to be an additional some additional like loans to keep grocery prices down. I mean, it gets complicated. It gets very complicated trying to keep the whole thing in stasis while asking lots of people not to work. I was, and I don't know if your viewers will think this makes me a horrible person, but I was concerned a little bit about the blanket $600 simply because I was arguing that a lot of people in D.C. frame this as we're telling everybody to go home and not work, but we're not telling everybody to go home. There's some people we're going to be asking to work a lot more, and especially anybody who's got to do with delivery, anybody who's got to do with food, anybody who's got to do with medicine. Like all of those people are going to be asked to work a lot more. And if we like take away all their support staff, we take away like all of their hourly workers because, you know, they've gotten laid off from Macy's and now they got on unemployment. The unemployment is a lot more than Whole Foods or anybody else could possibly pay them, or I guess possibly pay them on their current price structure. Then there's no pool for Whole Foods to like draw its workers for. There's even concern that there might not be pools for like hospitals to draw their workers from, because obviously they're doctors and nurses. Everybody knows about doctors and nurses, but you know, somebody's got to clean the floor, somebody's got to take out the trash. Somebody, like there are tons of like just basic jobs that are required to keep a facility going. And as more patients come through, you need more of those people. So where are you going to get them from? And so, you know, I was concerned that, you know, we should at least make it profitable for people who can work, who are healthy to work. But I mean, that has a side effect of, you know, we wanted to make sure that everybody was taken care of, no matter what their situation was. And the easiest way to do that was just to like max up, you know, these unemployment benefits, you know, really high. So.
Right. But I mean, another complicating factor to that is that the people who are drawn out of their home to go work at Whole Foods or something could catch the virus while they're out and about, and then they're another person that the doctors have to deal with, and they can spread it to more people. So yeah, it's a very complicated problem. Okay, so something else that happened after the financial crisis was some countries pivoted to austerity, and
right.
And I think a lot of people, at least the liberals and people on the left, thought that was a huge mistake. And these were huge, you know, these were giant debates in Angela Merkel and the euro and Greece and all the stuff that you maybe remember talking about on Blogging Heads, 10 or 12 years ago. But do you now it kind of, so we're still in kind of like the free spending phase of this. And, you know, the bill passed the Senate with 96-0, and it was like a voice vote in the House or something. So everyone is essentially on board at this point. They realize it's a huge crisis, but it's not. But you know, there's this either like this basic human idea that we have to eventually tighten our belts, or like we actually do have to tighten our belts. It's unclear to me whether this was like a delusion all along. But I remember a lot of people getting mad at Obama when he said, like, you know, we have to tighten our belts or something at some point in like 2011, the people being like the Matt Iglesias types, because they were saying like, no, this is like, you know, we can print money. we're never gonna go bankrupt. Spend. So do you think like, and so the first part of this pass is already 2.5 times size of the, you know, 2008, 2009 stimulus. Is there going to be like a giant like austerity push, you know, a year from now once the outbreak is subsided, hopefully?
I don't see how there's not, right? So, I mean, this is something that I've already started to think about, and at Tax Foundation I started to try to get, you know, some of my people to work on is like, you know, what will we do about that? What will respond about that? I mean, my position as an economist is, for the United States, there's essentially no danger here. I mean, there are some maybe really wild, you know, things you can think of, but even before you get to printing money, right, just to pay for all of this, the demand for U.S. bonds is so huge that like 4 trillion, 10 trillion, I mean, even if so we have about 20 trillion outstanding already, even if we double that to 40 trillion, it's very likely that people would buy them. And it's especially likely in a crisis. And so one of the things that we do to measure how bad a crisis is we look at the interest rate on U.S. bonds. And so the more people want to buy bonds, that drives up the price I don't know if I want to go through all this, but when the price of bonds goes up, the yield or interest rate on the bonds goes down. And so when yields on U.S. government bonds are falling, that means that lots of people are trying to buy them, right? If you see that happening, that very thing is a sign of a crisis. And it's a sign of a crisis because the U.S. Treasury bonds are, the safest bonds in the world. The United States is the largest economy in the world. A thing that I used to say all the time was, if the United States goes bankrupt, then that's so devastating to the rest of the world that there's no way you could be safe. And so you might as well be in U.S. Treasury bonds because, whatever else you're in, German bonds, gold even, it's not going to do well in a world in which the United States goes bankrupt. And so there's no risk to it, and there's no net risk to the United States going bankrupt. So that's why there's an enormous amount of demand, especially when there's a crisis. It's unlikely that huge demand is going to abate anytime soon. So the U.S. has just like no problem. Some other countries might have a problem that if they didn't have enough foreign buyers or even investors to buy their bonds, their own central banks, their equivalent of the Fed would have to buy them. In order for the Fed to buy them, the Fed would have to print money. In theory, that could cause inflation. Now, we live in a low inflation world, so that's not a huge problem for most people, but that's the problem that you could get. The people who are probably the most screwed are some of the countries in Europe who don't have their own central bank. They're dependent on the European Central Bank. And so, for example, Italy, who's in a lot of trouble, so Italy borrows a lot of money. They sell a lot of bonds. If there are not enough investors for their bonds, they can't just order the ECB to buy the bonds, to print money and buy the bonds. They have to ask the ECB to do so. And last time around, the ECB for a long time said no. And if it says no, then there's a chance that there won't be any buyers. And if there aren't any buyers, the price goes down, the interest rate goes up, and then they have huge interest payments that they can't make, and so they could conceivably go bankrupt. But what I had argued back then is just that there's no advantage to the ECB to saying no, and they should just do whatever it takes to get Italy and Greece and these other countries through the crisis, and eventually they capitulated, and that's what they did. So I think that, having learned that lesson, they're probably going to be willing to do that this time. And so the United States and Europe and the other major economies don't have a fundamental economic need to go to austerity. I do think that there'll be a strong psychological need to go to it. We've just seen that every single time. And so we're just, trying to be prepared for it and seeing if we can, handle it in the least destructive way possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in 2009, there was this kind of morality play aspect to it, where it was there were these countries that were profligate, like Greece, mm-hmm. or there were people who made poor financial decisions, like taking out a mortgage on a house they couldn't afford, and so those people need to take their medicine and learn a mm-hmm. lesson and blah blah blah. This situation seems very different in right. that. I'm sure there'll be people trying to spin a morality play kind of story of how China was the evil country in this, and blah blah blah. But it's not Italy, take your medicine now and you'll learn a lesson for next time. This is a novel, no pun intended, shock to the system that was no one's fault that we can really pin the blame on in the macro sense. So that kind right. of moralistic, the people in Greece, they never paid their taxes, they all had swimming pools and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. That thing we heard 10 years ago, that seems like it doesn't apply now, although maybe people will find narratives along those lines to create, villains and stuff like that as this rolls out.
Yeah. So, I think that sort of morality play is not as strong this time. But in the United States, if we just think about the United States, there was that backlash against TARP, which was basically to save the banks. There was that backlash against I forget exactly what it was called, but the home mortgage thing that Obama passed to sort of save mortgage people. But you saw that a lot of centrist economists and certainly to the left people were not for that. They were look, we need to save these homeowners. But then by 2010, 2011, Obama himself, many people who we regard as centrist were saying, well, okay, we did that. That was great. But the way this works is that you spend to help people in a crisis. And then once the crisis is over, then you need to build back up your reserves. And that requires, raising taxes, cutting spending, doing whatever it is to balance the budget. The argument I know that Matt had and I had at the time was that the crisis isn't really over, that we haven't recovered, that even though we're not falling, we still have tens of millions of people who are unemployed. And if we were willing to push the economy harder, it could grow and employ more people. And so there was a massive fight over, is that true? Maybe the economy is as good as it can get. This is the time. And then there was just a sort of old school centrist feeling that look, there's a time, there's a time to be responsible. And so I think that pushed people to do that. Those people aren't gone. They're sending me emails now. So
okay.
so
they still think they're, I mean, so it's like, so I remember there was this whole thing about this theory that structural unemployment had there's a skills gap and maybe unemployment is going to be stuck at 8.5% going forward, right, because of machinery and technology and blah blah blah, and so that seems to have been proven false. It lowered, it went down slowly to 3.5 before all this started. And so those people seemingly were proven wrong, but the people who advocated for the Iraq War, there's zero accountability in punditry or most other things once you reach a certain level in American life, and so the ideas the zombie ideas float out there. So there's this thing that's called the Defense Procurement Act or something where the president can order the production of specific things or order factories to start making a specific thing or take a certain contract from the government. That's, the idea was if we need to start making, missiles or something on short notice, that we can order this thing. And apparently it's been used hundreds of thousands of times for all sorts of Pentagon orders. But so it seems like Trump has started to do this maybe a little bit with, having GM or GE manufacture ventilators, and you can imagine other things. There's these, we seem to have not enough masks and plastic gowns and stuff like this. So we're kind of and then Trump called himself a wartime president, I think, in the past couple of days or something along those lines. So do you see that could we be moving towards a temporary kind of wartime or command economy where you have all these people out of work who have to stay in their homes, and then people in factories who are making masks and ventilators that are desperately needed in hospitals, and then the other food production and so forth is assured, but it's bureaucrats in Washington are deciding what the commanding heights of the economy are turning out.
No, I mean I just don't think the administration is going to do that. So the Pentagon uses this a lot because sometimes there are things that they're the only buyer for. So they're the only buyer for it. And in terms of that, maybe there's only one supplier. And then you get into a problem where the supplier could just hold you up, right? Could be yeah, really it's going to cost, however many, billions of dollars for this thing. And we're the only supplier, and, you need this, and, there's not even another market. So, you'll pay this or we're done. And in fact, the Pentagon is known for overpaying. I mean, they're famous for that.
Right.
And so they generally use the act to sort of say, okay, this has just gone far enough. I mean, we've overpaid you, but now you're just getting insane. And so stop. And also it's a backstop in negotiations to keep that from happening, to say, well, look, if this goes too far, we're just going to invoke DPA. So the argument that the Trump administration had, and I think this is actually mostly turned out to be true, is that because of the crisis and simply for PR reasons and maybe for humanitarian reasons, most companies were willing to try to strike a reasonable price. Supposedly, and this is only just random things I've read in New York Times, I don't have any sort of inside information on this, but supposedly GM was giving them a really hard time, kept upping the price, kept reducing the amount that they were going to deliver, and eventually they were screw it, you're now in DPA. And then they struck a deal, and apparently Ford and everybody else struck a deal too, and so like they haven't used it since then. But I think there's a general sense in the administration that they would prefer not to do it. The Pentagon, like whatever you think of Pentagon procurement, they have a long history with basically working in this extremely tight market with like only a couple of suppliers and they're the only buyer. And so they know what they're doing. But like FEMA doesn't. And I mean, it's not really clear. I mean, like you don't necessarily know as a director of FEMA how many like ventilators, in fact, the Ohio plant and GM can make. I mean, you do need some sort of deal there. You could get some sense that like you're screwing me now. Like, I might not know exactly how this works, but this is, you're screwing me now. But like in a general day-to-day sense, you don't know. And so I think for the most part, they're trying to rely on negotiation. And I think that's for the most part appropriate. So that's my take on it. I think some people would rather see Trump like invoke it more, simply like, I guess out of a sense of sentiment that this is wartime now, and like nobody should be screwing around. Just like get with it. But I think it's more complicated than that. I just don't think that we necessarily have the expertise to sort of guide, the production, especially the switching of production from making one thing to making another thing at a particular factory and deliver in a particular time, and know like what should be ordered or what should be like commanded from the government. So I think it's best if we stick away from that as much as we can. Okay,
so you do not foresee any sort of like nationalizing the ventilator manufacturer or the mask manufacturer or anything like that?
No. I don't think that's. I mean, the administration is just extremely, like not on that page. So I don't think that they're going to do that. Yeah.
Well, okay, so they've delayed income tax filing by 2 months, I think. 3 months, 2 months. Is this going to affect anything besides make it easier for people? Like, does the federal government need our, I guess they have the money already because, we pay it in the FICA taxes or whatever. But is there any actual effect here, or is this just like making it easier for people who are very, stressed out right now?
There's no real effect for the government. I mean, it's just in fact, you can always get your filing delayed, I think till October or whatever, if you want it. You just have to ask for it. And what they do is they make you pay interest. And so now they just made it so, okay, everybody's automatically delayed and nobody pays interest. So it's not really a big deal from their point of view.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So what's weird about this, I mean, there's many things that are weird about this, but like usually like say there was like a natural disaster, like, the San Francisco 1906 earthquake or something that like leveled everything, and then they have to like rebuild everything. So that's a huge amount of economic activity required to do all this rebuilding, or it's something that like 2008, which in my understanding had all, there were all these, mortgages that turned out were worth a lot less. And so, money went, the banks thought they had money that they didn't actually have. Like this is kind of this, it's like an asteroid hit or something, but like nothing's destroyed. Like all the factories are still there. Everyone is still, some people have died obviously, but most people are still able to work and hiding in their houses. Let's say we get a vaccine or something, or the virus kind of just like fades away through herd immunity or something like that. How long do you think before we start moving back up? Can people just walk back into their factory and start making stuff again? Or is everyone going to be like psychologically damaged from being inside for so long that they don't want to buy anything?
So I think, this is a massive debate now, like among economists, is, what's going to happen afterwards, right? And so one possibility is essentially what you were saying at the beginning, is that the pandemic's over, it's safe to go outside again, you go back to your jobs, people go back to buying what they were, and the economy just sort of like restarts. And we would call that like a V-shaped recovery. The fear is that there are a couple of reasons why that won't happen. One is just that once you take apart businesses, so workers leave, they're laid off, they go do other things, they may have like family that they go with, or move to other states, or they do whatever they're going to do, like in response to that putting the business back together is a really difficult exercise. And it's a really difficult exercise because like all businesses are like interdependent. And so before the restaurant can get put back together, then like, the supplier, the food supplier has to get put back together. And before they can put back together, whatever other companies they depend on have to get put back together. And simultaneously making that happen proves problematic. And so there's a concern among a lot of economists that if we get a lot of separations, if we get a lot of people like actually leaving their jobs, like getting them all back to the right jobs and the right businesses, and to keep everything going forward will be a complicated process that could take a long time. So that's number one. And that's actually the reason for the payroll support thing, is to say, essentially, don't fire anybody. That way, they know they have a job that they're coming back to, and we won't have to like sort everything out again and try to figure out who we're going to hire and where they went and, all this kind of stuff. So just keep everybody on payroll. And if that works, it could limit that to some extent. The other thing, and we're trying to stop that too, is there could be like various credit issues that people have, right? So some businesses, despite whatever we do, or, even already before this legislation passed, had to like default on things. Some restaurants just shut down and said, we're done. And so the more people who have like these financial problems, the harder it is to restructure, because they would then have to, completely restart that business again or get out from underneath whatever financial difficulty they had. And so I think there's concern about that. And then the third element is those two things happening, even if they were sort of a solvable problem, they create an enormous amount of uncertainty. And uncertainty does exactly what you were saying in the latter part, which is make everybody reluctant to spend. So you don't know exactly what we're going to face. Like when we get out, you don't know, if the person you were in business with before is still there, or how well they're operating. And so you hold back on investment, you hold back on hiring someone new. Consumers are a little bit more careful about their cash, and then that causes a sustained recession. So those three factors, taking apart businesses, financial disruption, and then uncertainty caused by those two things, are what make us fear sort of like an L. And early in the crisis, I think when we thought, I don't know what we were thinking, to be honest, but there was this idea, I know I was floating with or whatever. We thought maybe we could be over with everything by May. And we were like, if we can just get a huge burst of like summer spending, like maybe we can like, power through it and make it a V, like that, businesses would see so much demand that they would be like, all right, sure, I'll hire everybody back, that I had before. And if you've got a brother, bring him too. And, and then there would be a V-shaped recovery. It's looking less like that now. I mean, we've had huge numbers of people go on unemployment already. We know that this thing is going to last through May. I guess according to the best projections, it'll be over then. I don't know if like how much business will be like just ramp back up, just starting back up, or if there'll be a period where people are still hesitant to go out. And so now I'm more in the camp of at best it's going to be a fight to get back up, and at worst it could be another long shallow thing like we had after the Great Recession. Mm-hmm. So
you make me think of so on the first point, one thing that's different is like people are generally not moving right now because in some cases it's illegal, right. And where are you going to go because it's everywhere? So it's not like the Okies going to California or something. Like
right.
The workforces are, at least for now, seemingly are still geographically in the same place. So maybe that's an upside. But then, if we imagine how normal life reasserts itself, like, I think we've all realized how much of normal life involves touching other people with your hands, or touching objects out in the world with your hands, or breathing near someone you don't know. And so if, we are also freaked out that there's still pockets of this out there that, we don't want to go into a store or a restaurant or whatever, even though the experts say it's okay, then that's obviously bad. That'd be bad for everyone
right.
involved likewise. So I guess I don't know. It seems very unpredictable. Okay, maybe this will. We've been going for about 50 minutes. Maybe this will be the last thing I have. What are you like most worried about at this point? It's something that we haven't mentioned, perhaps that is looming out there, or something that concerns you.
like with the pandemic overall, or just the
Well,
economic?
either the economic side of it or the whole thing.
So, I mean, I think, what has to be the biggest worry in the whole thing is that we'll get a respike in either so after the summer. I think is probably the most dangerous thing. I think I've been pretty well convinced that like the summer will be better. And the respike could be like much worse because for the original pandemic, there were like seeds that came in. So people who had it, like, a few people came in New York and in Seattle and these places, and it slowly grew. Well, if there's a respike, then what you're thinking is that there are a few people like in every community, right, who have it. And then if it respikes, then there's like a blow up everywhere at the same time. And so the respike can happen faster than the original spike did because the seeds are like more dispersed like throughout the economy. So I think pandemic wise, that's the biggest fear. Economically, it would be that we had like, a lot of uncertainty coming out of this, an L-shaped recession, and then the same sort of, pullback that we had last time, both on monetary policy, people saying, well, look, it was okay for the Fed to have. So right now the Fed is open up to lending $4 trillion. So it's lending $4 trillion. It was okay for the Fed to lend all that money to people during the crisis, but we need to pull back. It was okay to spend, bunches of money to get us out of the crisis, but now we need to repay it back. And then we'll be stuck in the same sort of like long recovery. And at this point, I think it could be even worse because so we were close to the zero lower bound. I'm almost getting too technical before, but we were, the Fed didn't have a lot of interest rate room it could cut last time, but it did have some. This time it had almost none, and the economy is going down further. And so you would think that like it would need more kick to like get back up if it doesn't get back up on its own. And so
like
then
the Fed can't have like negative interest rates. Like
the Fed can have negative interest rates,
can't
right?
Give money, like loan someone and then give them some extra money along with it.
Right.
Well, maybe that'll happen. Who knows?
Or I guess a way for like lay people to see this straight up is that like when we had 2008, it was bad for everybody. But one good thing that did happen is that like mortgage rates went way down, right? And so there are a lot of people out there who had mortgages. They could refinance their mortgage. They could get some, they could get some more money or at least get lower payments like after the crisis happened. And that like gave some boost for people who weren't completely demolished. They had some little bit of boost. Nothing like that is like available now. Like, mortgage rates are about as low as they can go. They went down some, but like what can they do? And so there's really no sort of like kick in the traditional sense that the Fed could give. And when we already have like unemployment spiking much faster, that this could be, a lost decade for the United States. So, I mean, that's the big fear. And I guess that's the policy goal for like our next however long is to prevent that from happening.
Right. Okay. Maybe this is I lied. I have one more question, and then maybe this is outside your field. But like, okay, so the last pandemic that was global like this was the Spanish flu in like 1918, 1919, and then after that, the end of World War I, there was this decade of the Roaring Twenties and excess and the Jazz Age and all sorts of craziness that eventually led to the Great Depression in a lot of ways. But what is known about the like economic effects like after the Spanish flu ended? Was it like a huge bounce back, and also because the war was over, there was a huge bounce back that led to the boom of the 1920s? Or are those not connected?
So I don't think they're closely connected. I mean, so you had a boom because the war sort of like stopped things for a while, and especially in Europe, there was a lot of decimation, loss of life. But through that period, like coming out of 1900, you had an enormous amount of technological change. So the world that existed in like 1890 versus the world that existed in 1920, like was radically different.
Right.
And so I think that enormous amount of like technological boost was what spurred the Roaring Twenties. In fact, we have like data. Some of the data goes back to like when the stock market crashed. The stock market ran up in the 20s and then crashed, 1929. That like the stock market values in 1929 were fairly valued for what like productivity growth was going to do over the next 20 years. So even though everybody was like, this is way overvalued and this is crazy, and there were, runs on banks and things like that, it really was the case that the United States was entering into this massive era of productivity growth, where cars and electricity and everything that was widespread across the country and changed just about everybody's life. And so when we look at stock market values versus underlying productivity growth, which ultimately should be the source of all the value of capital, they were fairly valued, like at that point. So I think mostly what was pushing the Roaring '20s was that coming out of the end of the 19th century, there was just so much technological change, and people's lives were going to change. People were going to move to the cities. They weren't going to ride horses anymore. Like so much was going to happen. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay, well, Karl, this is very helpful. I learned a lot. I hope our viewers and listeners learned something also. So you are at the Tax Foundation, and you are also on Twitter. And what is your Twitter handle?
Karl by Karl Smith.
Karl by Karl Smith. Is that a pun or something? What does that mean?
Yeah. So I mean, for years I've had my blog or other online thing has had something to do with like fashion. And it was originally a play on my frustration or whatever eye roll that like a lot of economic theory was just fashion. Like it was just like such and such is fashionable now. So my old blog was model behavior, and I had a thing before that, but there were always like fashion puns about the fact that economic theory like was fatty.
That's interesting. Okay, and I am ARYEHCW on Twitter. You can follow me. So thank you again, and thanks to all of our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.